At the end of Objective 1, we had you practice the concept of completing the square because you're going to use it a lot throughout the rest of the unit. So in this first example, you can tell this equation is the equation of a circle because x is squared, y is squared. They both have the same leading coefficient, in this case 1, but the equation is not presented in perfect squared format. So, thus, we need to do the process of completing the square. Now, I've done step 1 already, which is group the x's together. You can see I put 8x squared plus 8x together, and group the y's together, y squared minus 18y, and I've also moved the constant to the other side of the equation. So this was positive 93, so when it moves over to the other side, it becomes negative 93. Now I'm going to start the process of completing the square. I'm going to rewrite x squared plus 8x, but then there's going to be a third term. Now we move on to the y squareds, plus y squared minus 18y, and then again, there's going to be a third term. Now, that means I'm going to have my negative 93 plus I'm going to add a couple of things to this side. So, half of 8 is 4. Start the process. Half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Half of negative 18 is negative 9. And negative 9 squared is 81. Now the next question is, since I added 16 and 81 to this side of the equation, I need to add 97 to this side of the equation to make the equation balanced, because that's what the equal sign really means. The equation has to stay in balance. So this 97 was a result of this 16 and that 81. So I guarantee you now I have perfect squares. X squared plus 8x plus 16 is x plus 4 quantity squared. Y squared minus 18y plus 81 is y minus 9 quantity squared when you factor it. If you haven't caught on, it's always going to be this 1/2 number. That's always going to be the perfect square that was actually created. That's why you have to pay attention to the signs. Half of negative 18 is negative 9. And sure, when you square it, it becomes positive 81. But within the factor, it's negative 9. So the factor, the perfect square, is always whatever the 1/2 number is. Now, over here, negative 93 plus 97 is positive 4. And by doing this simple little process, I now know the center of this circle is at negative 4, positive 9. And the radius is the square root of that number, which happens to be 4. So the radius is 2. Okay, for example 2, I chose a problem that it makes a lot of students nervous, and you'll see why in a second. The first step I'm going to do to completing the square is group my x's together again. So I'd have x squared minus 5x, and I know I'm going to have to add a third term to make it a perfect square. Now move on to the y's. I've got y squared plus 4y. And I know I'm going to have to add a third term. And then that negative 23/4 is going to move to the other side of the equation. So it's going to become a positive 23/4. And then I know I'm going to add a couple of terms. So here's the process. We know we have to divide by 2. Now the last thing you want to do is take your calculator out and take negative 5 and divide by 2 and get negative 2.5. all you want to do is keep this in fraction form. So negative 5 divided by 2 is simply negative 5 halves. And then the next thing you're going to do is square it. So that becomes 25 fourths. Now we're going to do the same thing here, but it's an even number. It's much nicer to divide an even number by 2 than to divide an odd number. It's cleaner. So if you take 4 and divide it by 2, you get 2, but then you square it back again and you get 4. Now, what do we have to add over here? Well, we have to add the 25 fourths and the 4, but we need to have common denominators to put all this stuff together, so that 4 would be 16 fourths. So that actually turns out to be 41 fourths. Now, what do we have as an overall equation now? Well, remember, trust the process. You just made a perfect square, and the perfect square is always the 1/2 number. So it's x minus 5 halves squared plus y plus 2 squared. And the big thing is, what is all of this? 23 plus 41 would be 64 fourths. And 64 fourths is 16. So we have x minus 5 halves squared plus y plus 2 squared equals 16. And now I know where the center of my circle is. The center of my circle is positive 5 halves, negative 2. And the radius is the square root of 16, which equals 4. My last example is a very wordy problem, but really all it says is this. Here's the equation of a circle. Show that the circle that is made by this equation is congruent to the circle that has a center of 0, 0 and a radius of 9. So let's go back to this one first. If the center of the circle is 0, 0 and the radius is 9, this is what the equation must look like. So the center is 0, 0, or pardon me, the radius is 3. So the equation must equal 9. In order for the radius to be 3, this must be a 9 in the equation. So now let's take this new circle that's given to us by this ugly equation. Now we just need to start expanding it out. X squared plus y squared plus 20 equals, now the first thing I'm going to do here is distribute 10x minus 4y. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I need these x's and y's over here, and I need that 20 to go over there. So when anything changes over across the equal sign, it simply changes sign. So I'm going to do a couple steps together. I'm going to move the 10x over to this side, and I'm going to group it with that x squared. So that would be x squared minus 10x, and I'm going to make room for my third term in the trinomial. I'm going to do the same thing for y squared plus y squared. When this minus 4y jumps over to this side, it would be plus 4y, and I need room for that third trinomial, for that third term in the trinomial when I complete the square. Now, I'm also going to take the constant, which is positive 20, and move it over to this side of the equation, which would be negative 20. But when I complete the square, I'm going to be adding some stuff to it. So now I start the process of completing the square. Half of negative 10 is negative 5, and then square it, and you get 25. Half of positive 4 is 2, and square it, and you get back to positive 4. Now, to keep the equation balanced, I've added 25 and 4, so I'm actually adding 29. So what does this look like in its nice completed form? Well, remember, we made a perfect square right here, and it's always the 1/2 number. So x minus 5 quantity squared plus y plus 2, it's always the 1/2 number, equals negative 29. Negative 20 plus 9 is positive 9. All right, so the center of this circle is 5, negative 2, and the radius is square root 9, which is 3, and that's how I know my new circle and my original circle are congruent to each other, because they both have the same radius. This one had a radius of 3, and this one has a radius of 3. Now the last question is, what did we have to do to get from the circle that started at 0, 0 to the circle that ended at 5, negative 2? So if the center of the original circle was 0, 0, and the center of the new circle, C prime, is 5, negative 2, then what had to happen? We moved 5 units to the right, and we moved 2 units down. So that would be the map.